Hello, everyone. Welcome. Let's see here. All right. Hello. Happy Monday. Let's see. Can't believe we're about to finish September. It's too quickly. They are doing still doing construction right outside my window. So if you do hear any loud banging or anything, that's what's happening. They're actually removing the plaster. Our building's very old, and they're removing some of the old plaster, and then there's like this hammering going on. So sorry about that. Unfortunately, I can't escape it, no matter where I go in the apartment. All right, so let's see here. Hello, Indiana. Welcome. All right, so let me pull this up here. Okay, and let me bring the video up there. And let's see if the animations will work. Well, welcome everyone. And thank you so much for joining in on another Monday session for the Urban Garden Learning Series. So under this series, we offer classes on various subjects, Q&As, plant clinics, and of course, open forums. And for those of you who might be new, if you are interested in sharing a little bit about your collection, maybe you have a topic that you really want to dive in on, anything like that, you can reach out and we can totally set that up. Just let me know. And no worries and no pressure either. You don't have to take up the whole amount of time. If you prefer to take up only a few minutes or half hour, anything you'd like, let me know and we will set that up. Today we're going to be talking about my methodology for transitioning propagations. Now, everyone's methodology is different. This was just something that through years of trial and error, this has been my personal most successful way for my propagations to survive. So I definitely want to show you a little bit more about my process. And just for those of you also tuning in, so next week we're going to have a Q&A, and so you can come prepared. Of course, you can ask questions in the chat today if you'd like, but the focus is going to be primarily on transferring propagation. So next week is going to be more open in terms of we can just sit here and take questions. For those of you who, again, this is like a class that is free. I'm not going to monetize this class, but if you would like to give an offering, I'm more than happy. I am very grateful for that. But again, no pressure, no obligation at all. Folks just were asking if I would put this up, and for the other folks asking if I would set up a Patreon. So I had set one up several years ago, and nothing happened with it. So I was giving it a little bit of a I guess a refurbishing, and so now my Patreon is now live. So if anyone is interested in that, for those of you who had asked, that's there. And yeah, so I'll start putting updates on there. It's totally up to you, but just so I'm just throwing that in there. And for those of you that if you'd like to reach out, info@urbangarden.eco is the email. If you'd prefer Instagram, you can go ahead. If you just want to check out the website for upcoming events or just for further information, let me know. There are free downloads on the website too, and I'm going to be adding quite a few in the next coming weeks. So keep an eye out on that. The animation works. Okay. So I've been playing a lot with Canva. I've been having a lot of fun with this. So I wanted to talk today a little bit about transferring propagations. And propagations can be done in so many different ways. This is an example with a pothos. And as you can see, the person is cutting them right below the node. And then they're removing the bottom leaves because they're going to be putting them in water. That's how they're going to root them. Now, you don't always have to root your cuttings in water. If you did have some cuttings, you can definitely, in some cases, you can pop them right back in the soil and they will root for you. Tradescantia is an example of that. Pothos is actually pretty good at that too. Hoya as well, and Dracaenas too. So, I mean, there's plenty of plants that you can do that with. If, let's say, you have a mother plant and you accidentally snap a branch or a vine, or you just want to cut her back a little bit and then put her pups, basically these little cuttings right back into the base of the pot with the mother plant, and then they tend to root up pretty easily. Now, the cons to that is it depends. It really depends on the environment. If your soil composition is holding a lot of moisture and maybe has a really high content of microorganisms that aren't necessarily beneficial. So let's say you happen to have a really peaty type of mix, and it just so happens that there's some type of bacteria in there, there's some type of fungus in there, that when you do put a fresh cutting in there, sometimes it will just rot. It can rot. Another con is if, let's say, you're accidentally overwatering the mother plant, then you end up overwatering those cuttings as well, and they have no roots when they're first cut, so they can easily just start to rot, and then you would lose those. That's why in many cases, like, I personally like to make sure my cuttings callus, which means that when you cut it, I let them sit for at least 24 hours so that they create a scab. So the wound basically gets covered in a layer. If you've ever even cut things like turmeric or ginger, if you've ever cut like a piece off of like a big chunk, if you come back the next day and look, it's like a perfect little scab is over what you had cut. And so that's a great example of callusing if you really want to see it on a larger scale, because sometimes it's hard to see if it's like a little cutting. Messing around with like ginger that way, you can literally see it. I've seen really cool time lapses. You just see it forming. It's super cool. So I like to wait. I personally like to wait because that's just an extra layer of protection, right? More than likely, it's going to lower that percentage of some type of pathogen potentially making its way into the actual tissue of the plant, infecting it with some type of bacteria or fungus that then gets into the center, the pith of the plant, and then ends up just the whole thing is ruined, right? And especially if you only have one node, those are very tricky. I especially get very crazy with those because if there's only one node to work with, so let me actually show you an example of nodes, just so that you see. So this is a cutting that I got, and it's a no ID. So sometimes these are actually called noids, like because no ID. Some people just call them noids. But we don't know what this is. We thought it was an anthurium, like an anthurium fingers, but we've had folks say that it's not. So we're not sure what this guy is, if anybody recognizes this cutting.
Jocelyn,
Yes.
we cannot see. We're still on the video of the pothos.
Oh, thank you. Sorry about that.
Welcome.
Let me spotlight myself. There we go. So this cutting right here. So yeah, I'm being told that it's not a anthurium fingers, which is what I thought it was. if anybody recognizes this, I was trying to find, there are quite a couple plants that can get this type of leaf structure. So I'm not sure, but these are the nodes here that we're working with. So for folks who maybe aren't aware of nodes, so a node is a part in your plant in which the leaves arise, roots might arise. For aroid plants, so especially plants that are epiphytic, these nodes will also be the place where your aerial roots specifically will also be forming. And so these are formed in order to grasp onto things, to look for extra moisture and so on. So this is what's going to be clinging to your moss poles, if that's what you're doing. So this one is an example where there are two nodes here. And so this leaf is arising from this node specifically, and we have this one to work with. So technically, if I wanted to, I could cut it here and try my luck and see if another one would sprout here. And then I would expect my root structure to really emerge from this bottom one. Now, this person left a really big chunk, so I might be cutting that back. So this here, if you leave all of this extra space, all of this is going to rot, right? Because roots cannot come out from this. There's no node. So this is just going to rot. And so the danger with that is if it starts to rot, it'll most likely go into the healthy tissue, and then this whole this node is no longer viable. And then you lose that plant. So imagine this was $5. So it was not. I love getting odd cuttings like that from private sellers. But especially if you're buying more expensive plants, and then you don't want to risk it, especially if that's the case. You definitely don't want to play around like that. So I do recommend that if you're going to be playing around with cuttings for the first time, try for cheap ones. Try to maybe go more for private sellers that are selling them for like $5-10. So it's not a big financial hit. There are definitely cuttings. I have personally bought cuttings that were $50-60. Yeah. So and it's a hit or miss. It's a hit or miss, but when it's a really a hard species to find, I've done that. But I wanted to show you here as an example too. So for instance, this is another cutting I got for $5. And this one is the Syngonium albo. So we do have a couple of these in our collection, but this one was just had such a pretty leaf on it. So I definitely wanted to play around with this one. And so here you can see this node here. It already has some root growth here, and you can see. Let's see if I can try to isolate that so that the camera will really get it. It's hard to see here, but these roots have root hairs on them. They're very fuzzy. And so that's what you're hoping for when you're trying to see if your plants are ready to, they're close to being ready to be transferred up. Now, usually the rule of thumb tends to be that the roots are about 1 inch to 2 inches. Some folks prefer to let them stay a little bit longer in that water before transferring them. But the big thing is just trying to make sure that you have some of these thicker roots with root hairs developing, because what you don't want is only water roots. And so water roots tend to be what are also called wound roots. I can't say that really fast. So they're the first roots to arise when there's a wound on the plant. They're kind of like the survival strategy for the plant. And so sometimes it's if there's a wound, if there was a rapid flooding, something happened, and the plant, there was some damage to the plant, and they will put out these really thin, and when they're in water especially, these really thin, fragile roots, that just, they don't work the same as soil roots at all. So they're very fine, and they'll actually start to rot and die off after you actually do the transfer. So what you want is to get these roots that are thicker, they have these root hairs on them, and these are the ones that are going to be much more adequate and more effective in terms of collecting water once you have them in soil. So this one would probably need a little bit more time, though you could totally put this into a substrate mix now. But I personally would wait a little bit longer in water before doing so. But this one, which it looks like it's a golden dragon. Here we go. This one has some really nice roots. So this one's going to be ready to transfer. And then this one has this chunk here. So this is where all that growth is coming from. And this is a golden dragon. It's for you to see. I really like these guys. I have a cutting that's currently growing in my kitchen. I just love the shape of their leaves, and I've been seeing folks now selling variegated ones, but they're very expensive, and I'm like, I'll wait till they drop. I'll wait till the prices drop. You know, when you see some really cool plants, yeah, just wait. The prices will drop. Don't worry, it'll get there eventually. So I'm gonna show you how I like to switch these guys out from water to substrate. But I quickly wanted to show you this. This was a freebie. So I had bought a couple plants from them, and they said, hey, I have this extra piece of my Monstera deliciosa, and it's just literally a stick. Like, it's literally a chonk, as it's referred to. And would you just like it? I'll just throw it in your bag. And I was like, sure, that's fine. And so what I did is I put it into sphagnum moss, and I put it into a Ziploc bag, and I totally forgot about it. So I completely forgot about it. I have it in one of my west windows. I have some in my kitchen. So I have my plants up on a shelf, and then I have a little shelf it's a wooden shelf with like little slats. So only a little bit of light gets through. And so I like to keep a lot of my propagations in that area, because they're getting sunlight, but it's not really strong direct sunlight. So I had put the bag there, and I was actually cleaning up and watering everybody. And I had not looked at this thing in weeks, completely forgot it was there. And now I wanted to show you. So it went from being a stick, this is just a stick, to look at these roots. Look at that. Those roots are crazy. And now it has 2 leaves coming in. So I'm gonna have to transfer it out of this, but I wanted to leave it like this. I was like, oh, I gotta show everyone on Monday. So now, whoops, I don't want to bend these leaves here. So these itty bitty little monstera leaves are popping up. And it has a very nice root already. This really has a couple little roots, but this really huge, really nicely developed root that has a lot of root hairs. So this would actually be a pretty good specimen to just, you know, pop into like an aroid mix already. But yeah, it's easy as that when it comes to propagating things like Monstera, pothos. You can propagate them like this. I like to just try so many different ways, so that's why I'm encouraging you to experiment. Just try different things. I've tried perlite. I've tried them in leca to propagate them in leca. simple Ziploc bag. I've done jars. There's just so many ways, and it's just fun to kind of play around, see what works. Especially, let's say if you have a vine, for instance, like some type of let's say your Scindapsus vine, and it gives you a really long runner, and there's a bunch of nodes, but there's no leaves on them. That's a great chance to snip it and then cut them up and try to propagate them in different ways and see what works. It's just a lot of trial and error, and so I really like to mess around like that, because then you really end up kind of seeing what works and what doesn't. Oh yes,
Yes, Jocelyn, did you water the sphagnum moss and then close the bag?
yes. So what I did is and so mind you, that was only one time.
Oh.
So only one time I moistened it. So I put some sphagnum in here. I filled it up with, I moistened it, I wrung it out, made sure there was no extra water settled in the bottom of the bag. So it was just like a damp bed of moss. And then I placed the chunk like this right on it, and that's all. That is all. And then I closed the bag and I put it into indirect light, and this is what this has transpired in the yeah, it was
Yeah, that's
super.
great.
Yeah, it's really easy. So a lot of folks kind of get a little nervous in terms of trying to propagate their plants, but again, there's no one way. There's so many different ways, so many ways you can experiment. And so I guess in terms, I'll quickly go on just different ways to start the plants, and then the way that I like to transfer them. So one is in sphagnum moss. Now the pros to this, it's a nice way also to visually know if the environment gets dry, because this will change color. So when it's moist, it's this nice dark color. If your sphagnum moss dries, it turns like a bright beige. So visually, it's a great indicator. Oh gosh, it's dry. I have to wet it. That's one good thing. Also, just that maintenance of it holds onto water, but as long as you didn't leave it sopping wet, where there's a bunch of water hanging out at the bottom, pretty good at maintaining that moisture control and not rotting your plant. Now, if you did leave it completely just waterlogged, it's just there's too much water, so then you do end up rotting them out. But a couple cons though, is the biggest con is that sphagnum moss is not a renewable resource. And so all of my sphagnum moss, for instance, I stopped buying sphagnum. So I haven't bought sphagnum for a very long time, for a couple of years now. All I do is I reuse the sphagnum I already have. And then once it starts to break down, I toss it. I just happen to have a lot. So I just keep reusing it. I disinfect it when I'm done with a plant. So let's say with this, I would transfer this plant. I would take this sphagnum along with any other sphagnum that I'm ready to disinfect, and then I actually boil it. I boil it, and then I let it soak in hydrogen peroxide, and then I let it air dry. And then once it's nice and dry and crispy, I put it back in a bag that's labeled clean, so that I know that it's ready to go when I want to add it to some type of propagation. But it's not a renewable resource, and it's doing a lot of damage. The harvesting of it is doing a lot of damage to their native environments. So there are other alternatives. So if you don't already have sphagnum moss on hand, there are so many other things that you can use that are just much more environmentally friendly. But if you do have just, you happen to have a huge bag of sphagnum that you have for years now that you just keep reusing, it'll stretch. It'll go for, you can reuse it quite a few times. So that's what I've been doing in the meantime. And once I run out, then I run out, and I'll just keep, using other things. But I'm just opting not to purchase any more new bags. But this, that's the biggest con. And then the other one, of course, if you do let it get waterlogged, it will potentially start to rot your plant. And also, if you're not careful and you close the container and there was, let's say, a fungus gnat or a fruit fly or something inside of it, they will go nuts. You will have fungus gnats. Yeah, you will have a really bad infestation, because this is like a perfect little environment for a fungus gnat. Now, one thing you could add if you wanted if you do start, like I have a colony of springtails. And so springtails, they're these little white invertebrates that they jump. Sometimes you see them in your plants, in your soil. You might see them when you're watering your plant and they're escaping through the drainage holes. And they're these little white things. And when you try to touch them, they jump. They almost look like little teeny tiny fleas, little white fleas. But they're actually isopods. I'm sorry, not isopods, springtails. And they're beneficial organisms. So they actually eat anything that's rotting. They eat fungus, especially. So what's great is they're not hurting your plant. So I like to have I have a colony of them. And what I do is a lot of my, propagations, I have, especially for like my seedlings, I like to drop a couple in there. And what happens is they populate. And so they're eating any of the rotting material. So then that is helping the plant, because now the plant isn't sitting in any material that could potentially harm it. It also eats any fungus or anything like that might start to grow. And it's just a great way to counteract the bad things that could potentially happen. And they don't mess with your plant. So I love that. I also have a colony of dwarf isopods too that I like to add to my terrariums and stuff as a cleanup crew. And so I highly recommend it. Working with invertebrates is the best way to go. We actually just ordered a bunch of, we're actually going to pick it up this week, green lacewing larvae and some predatory mites. So we've been dealing with thrips, which if you've been watching me for a while, I hate thrips so bad. I would rather have mealybugs. I would rather have spider mites. I would rather have scale, like any type of scale, versus thrips. They are just so difficult to get rid of. And it started with one plant that we got, and it spread throughout my husband's entire collection in his office. And then it started to spread out here. And so it started taking a couple leaves of my mayoi. It took all the leaves of my mexicanum. So my mexicanum is a stick right now. It really did a number on stuff. Everybody back here is fine. But some of the plants are just now getting new leaves because they've been getting treated. So we just said, all right, we had been giving them, putting ladybugs out, but the ladybug supply has been really low the last couple weeks. So we just ordered green lacewings and predatory mites. So what we'll be doing with the predatory mites is that they're like little sachets. So what you do is you hang them on your plant, and then they come out. It's like you hang them like a little air freshener. And so then and you open the little slit, and then the predatory mites come out and they start to climb all over your plant looking for anything that shouldn't be there. But these specifically like to eat thrips. So we got several sachets, and we're going to be putting them all around and letting them do their thing. And the same with the lacewings. We're going to be just dropping them in random plants, and yeah. And so these guys, these beneficial organisms, so they actually don't harm the plants in any way, and they don't bug us either. They're not going to be climbing on your furniture and things like that. They stay on the plant because that's where their primary source of food is. And if they can't find a food source, they will pass away. But again, they're not something that's like going to become a pest or is going to, go all over your house. They stay within the plants. Now the green lacewings, they will get wings when they mature. So they'll probably try to escape out our windows, but they are native, so we're not worried about that. And I usually in the summer I catch them on purpose and release them so that they'll lay eggs in case there was anything, if there's a mealy bug or a spider mite somewhere. But thrips, my last battle with thrips was a couple years ago, and it took out my entire Syngonium collection. So I was hoping that was the end of it and I'd never have to deal with thrips again. But they found their way. And no matter how long you've been working with plants, there's always going to be the potential for an infestation every time. So even if you didn't bring in an infected plant, they hitch a ride on you. So even if you were at a plant shop and you accidentally rubbed up against something, or something just landed on you, or even just going outside, or even through your open window, things will fly in. Thrips fly. So we assume it was with this one plant because that we saw the thrips on it when we saw that it started getting yellow. But I mean, it could have been the plant itself, and that could have been patient zero, or it just could have just gotten in, and that's just who got attacked first. We don't know, but it's in terms of other ways to potentially propagate your plants, so just in water too, that's an option. So I had this guy in sphagnum. You can just put cuttings in just water. That's another option. I wouldn't recommend this with very succulent plants, though I have had a lot of success doing that with snake plants. So snake plants in water, just not very deep water. I found that it's just a little bit very shallow. Had a lot of success. Even cylindrica, which is the thicker snake plant that looks kind of like a really long finger, and they do great in water. So it depends, right, in terms of for succulent species. But yeah, straight up water. Another option is perlite. So something like this, if you were to fill a container just with perlite, you can totally do that. There's also leca in here. And you could just do a container with leca as well. Totally an option. Pon is another option that's becoming very, very popular. And pon is great with, also providing nutrients to the plant. So that would probably be a better option if you want to stick with hydroponics though, long term. If you're not trying to transfer them, you just want to let them stay in water for the rest of their lives. Pon might be a better option. And then also just putting them directly into substrate. So that's always an option. Now there are ways to help your propagation potentially be a little bit more successful. And so for instance, let me just show you here. Here is if it was already a pup, right? It's already a pup for a larger plant. So sometimes these are already developing their own roots. So all you're really doing is dividing the root systems. This is a great option if you're just starting out with propagating, because again, it gives you a little bit of a head start, because the pup, you wait till it's already a little bit more established. It's a nice size. You don't want to grab it when it's still super tiny. You want to let it grow, let it mature a little bit, let it get its own root system going, then separate it from the mother plant. It just increases your odds, but you can't totally do that with pups. Also air layering. So air layering is really neat. You can do that, especially with things like figs, with Dracaena as well, like dragon trees. These, you basically, you can see the roots through the plastic there. And so what they did is that they mixed sphagnum with some coco coir, and they put a plastic bag, so they wound the branch, so the node. They will actually so disinfect like a knife and then cause a wound to the node, and then they will immediately cover it. And so what happens is that now the plant is like, oh gosh, I've been injured, but then it senses this nice environment, and it's like, oh, okay, I can actually put out roots in this area. And so what happens is, especially if it's a clear plastic, you can leave it on for a few weeks, and you can literally watch the roots develop. And then when they're at a satisfactory amount, and you're like, all right, yeah, this is looking really nice, you snip right under it. And now you have a plant that already has roots going. So it's much easier for you to then transfer it into some type of substrate. And again, it's like a little hack to kind of get ahead to increase that success. So air layering is a lot of fun. So if you have like a Dracaena or a fiddle leaf fig with like a, it's really nice, and then it has this one really weird branch that is just sticking out and looking really weird, and you want to cut it really bad, but you hate to just waste it. You could totally do that and just get it to root and then pot it in the main pot, and just make your plant look a little fuller. You could totally do that. And so, oh yeah, and this was just to show that, yeah, you can just totally plop them in water. That's totally fine. And here's a great example of just how the roots start to develop, and like this is looking good. It's going to be ready to transfer. Now you can totally leave your plants in water long term. So I have some philodendrons. I have some different types of epiprenums of what are known as pothos. I have spider plants, all that are just completely in water long term. They've just, since they've been cut for years now, are just in water. You can't keep them that way. And some plants are happy to do so, and they'll live for years and years and years like that. So if you don't want to transfer them and they're doing really well, you don't have to. So don't feel obligated, like, oh gosh, the roots, I have to transfer it. I have to transfer it. If you don't want to and the plant's happy, you can totally let it stay for longer. That's perfectly fine. And then there's also with things like snake plants. Here's an example with an aloe, where you can get pups, right? You can do these types of root division where these babies will develop attached to the mother plant at the base, and then you're able to let that kind of develop a little bit, as I mentioned, like with the Pilea peperomoides picture. Let that develop a little bit, and then you can cut and separate them, and then you have two plants. So you can totally do that. And with these, it's actually much easier if, again, even like with the example of the Pilea, that you can actually put this directly into soil. So you don't have to separate this if there's already that root system developed, and then put it into water and then wait and then transfer it. You can do a direct transfer into a substrate. So you can totally do that. So let me quickly answer some questions I saw come in, and then I will do a little demo. Okay, here we go. So Sue asks, do you ever use a rooting compound? Great question. I do own a rooting compound. I used it for a few times, and then I was doing some experiments to see if it actually sped up the process. I actually didn't find much of a difference. I don't know if it was I cannot remember the brand that I got. But yeah, I haven't used it since. So I think it's been like 2-3 years, and that's probably sitting in some cabinet. And so I haven't used it since. So it didn't wow me to the point that I made it like a routine. But I mean, I'll try it again. Sure, I have plenty of plants that I need to chop, so I'll experiment again and give it another try, because that reminds me, I actually do have like an entire container uh, in a cabinet. But no, personally, I not with any of these guys. I haven't been using any rooting compound. Darlene asks, have you ever tried leaf snap to try to identify the plant? No, I haven't. I haven't tried. I was trying to look in different books that I have, and post it on different forums. But I'll try the leaf snap app and see if it points me in the right direction. Yeah, hold on, Mozart, buddy. He's trying to hop on my lap right now. Gabby asks, would you cut below the node for new roots to grow in the water? It appears that the cuttings are above the node because the person who cut it wants the new stem to grow there. Is that correct? And so, hold on, let me grab another. Here we go. So with when you're cutting here, so for instance, this is an example where this was a vine, and so the person cut here because there was another node right above here, so they're separating this guy out. So this is only one node that's active here. So this is where all the roots will grow out of. Nothing will grow from here, from down here, and nothing will grow from up here. So the node will give rise to other branches, will give rise to roots. Everything is determined by this little thing here. And you can actually see, it's hard to see here, but there's this little nub right here. And so that is an example of node activation, which means that it's going to be pushing out new growth. Now, I don't know if it's going to be a root or another shoot. Might be another shoot. But yeah, so it will be coming. But in terms of would you cut below the node for new roots to, well, yeah, I mean, you would. So here there is this little chunk left. So I would probably want to cut a little bit higher here. I didn't personally cut this guy, but I would cut a little bit higher here and let this callus and then put it back into the water, because I don't want this whole chunk here to just rot, and then it travels up into here, kills all those living cells, and then I lose the whole thing. So yeah, if you're cutting right here, it's because you're expecting that node, that's going to be your new base. That's going to be your new root system. So that's why you would be cutting there. And above the node, because so if somebody cuts above the node, more than likely the plant isn't going to root. Now, there are exceptions. There are some species that will root regardless. They don't care. But if you're talking specifically about, like, let's say like Monstera or philodendrons or Scindapsus, pothos, right? All of these need a node. So if you actually were to, let's say, cut right here, that's it. Now, sometimes some plants like ficus, so like fiddle leaf fig, if you actually cut above the node and you just have like a leaf on a stick, sometimes those actually root, but it will never grow. So it'll root for you, but you'll just have a leaf, and it'll never give you more growth. And you know, they live for a while and then they die. So yeah, they you know, sometimes, so there are some that will root, but then they won't grow. It's the same issue with the Carrii. So with these Hoya Carrii, with these they call them sweetheart Hoyas, where you see them selling them on Valentine's Day, and it's just like little heart in a pot. And so what those are cuttings of that, but without the node. So it just rooted, and it's just this one little leaf that is growing in that plant, in that planter, and that's it. It will never grow, and they usually live like a year or two, and then they die. If you have a node, then it'll eventually grow up into a huge vine. But yeah, Val asks, so it doesn't need oxygen. You kept it in a closed bag. Yeah. So well, yeah. So I guess it was producing its own. It was producing, I guess, enough oxygen for itself. I really legitimately was not opening this. I completely forgot about it. So I guess it was just enough that it was able to continue cycling it over. I did not open that like before, so I really did forget it for several weeks. So yeah, I it seems, yeah. You know, plants, they will also, so while plants do release oxygen as a byproduct of photosynthesis, they do also release any carbon dioxide they didn't use. Usually it's in the evening. They'll release some carbon dioxide. It's a negligible amount. It's not like a ton. But I guess, you know, in that process, it was just enough to keep it cycling, I guess. And it was happy and putting out growth, and yeah, so it can happen. Sue, have you tried putting moss around the node and sealing a bag around it without cutting it off the plant? Yes, and that's an example of air layering. So you can totally do that. Air layering is really a really cool thing. And Darlene, yes, exactly. So that she's asking about air layering. So you can totally do that. I have seen that now they are selling these little plastic spheres basically. And so what you do is you put your moss or your you know, if you're trying to put like a mix in these little like cup things, and they lock in around the branch so that you aren't using like plastic wrap or a Ziploc bag that you've kind of MacGyvered around with rubber bands. It's like this little thing that just locks. And it's I haven't bought one yet, but I want to try. I really want to try one of those, but I have been seeing them now becoming available. Irene asks, can I use coconut fiber instead of sphagnum moss? Yes, absolutely. You can use that. Cocoa fiber, the difference with cocoa fiber is that it does tend to dry a little bit faster than sphagnum. But yeah, you can use that as well if you'd want to experiment that way. Randy, I stopped using peat moss a number of years ago. I use coir. Yes. Yes. And so with for those who are not aware, so sphagnum is the top part. So sphagnum and peat moss are the same thing, are the same plant. But sphagnum is the top part that's exposed to the air, and then the peat is what's beneath the surface. And it's this nice, dark, rich, really fertile type of substrate. But when these things are they're literally bulldozers ripping it out. And it takes thousands of years of death and layering. So it's basically the moss dies, and then that kind of moves down, and then new moss grows, and it's like layer, 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 layer. And these are like in wetlands. And what happens is that the peat moss actually works as a filter. And so it's necessary for microorganisms, for the food chain, and for maintaining the health of the ecosystem. And what's happening is that folks are going out there and just bulldozing and harvesting it all, and there's nothing to replenish it. And then there have been some efforts, some folks that say that, oh yeah, they found like sustainable ways where they only harvest one run area, and then they wait a few years, and then they'll harvest a brand new area, trying to give that time to replenish. But to really, really get replenished, it takes thousands of years. So it's like there's no win. There's no win. Gabby asks, how would you propagate succulents? Yes, so it depends on the succulent. So for succulents that I can propagate the phylloclades, which are things like echeveria or jade plants, where you can take the little leaf, basically, which is the phylloclade, and propagate that. I like to do that actually on leca. So I have been doing that. So I actually just do, I use like a terracotta or a ceramic dish, which is for the plants. I fill that up with leca. I put them all nicely on top, nestled on top, and then I fill the water, but not where it goes over the leca. It's under the leca, because the leca does absorb the water, but I don't want it to be, it's more of like an island, right? Versus completely underwater. So then what happens is that just enough moisture is touching the little leaves, and they start to develop roots that go into the leca, and they flourish. I've had a lot of luck doing that, and that's been my way of doing it personally. I stopped trying with soil. Every time I tried to propagate my succulents in soil, they would get moldy. They would, or they would shrivel up. It's like I couldn't figure out how to keep them happy. Either they were getting too dry on the soil or they were getting too wet in the soil. And I was really frustrated. And then I said, how about, I had a bunch of leca, and I was like, how about if I tried leca? And I did that. And then for a year, I did an experiment where I had two in leca. I had them two set up, but one had a dome. It was just a plastic container, Tupperware, over it, and another one didn't. And the ones that actually didn't have the dome, while they still rooted, they were really shriveled. They really weren't very happy. And the ones that actually had the dome, that would get condensation, it would get really foggy in there. You would think it would rot. No, they were nice and plump, and they were really growing already. They were little plants ready to be planted up. So that was a really fun experiment. And I have a lot of photos, and I'll share them. But yeah, that's how I like to that's how I still like to propagate them. So anytime I have a leaf that drops, or if I'm out and about and there's like a little leaf, I love that. I just pop it in there, and yeah, and now both of them are covered under domes because I felt bad for the ones that were getting shriveled up. So I put a dome on them, and then they start to fill up. Yeah, and so I have them both, like just two little domes in my in my bedroom window. But I love them. Randy's asking, what is a pond? And so pond is a mix. It's like lava rock. There's two different components in there too. And basically it's a mix that they look like it's all rock, basically. But they actually are very good at releasing nutrients and minerals into your plant's water, because you have it sitting in that mixture in water. And yeah, it's been getting really popular as a method of keeping your plants like in a hydroponic setting, so like where you're just keeping them in water, and you're not having to add a bunch of like hydroponic fertilizer. You can just let them be in the pond. I do have some Hoyas in pond, and we have our tricolor Adansonii also in pond currently. Brenda, can you propagate ferns by taking a full stem with leaves? Are the nodes at each leaf attachment? So I guess it depends on the fern, because there are some ferns that are called ferns that are not true ferns. And then there, with some ferns, like true ferns, in some cases you can do root division. You can do that from that base. If you separate them out, you would be able to. But that's more based on root division. So ferns aren't going to, as far as I'm aware, they only propagate truly like through like spores, and it's a whole process. So they wouldn't propagate via cuttings. Yeah. Randy asks, where am I? Oh, I am in New York City. I am in New York City, where the temperature has dropped. It is chilly. So I actually I've been having to close the windows, and I've been considering having to take out the space heaters to bring the temperature slightly higher, because it's been cold. And Jamie, I thought callus was putting it in the soil, was just for putting it in the soil. Do you callus it before growing roots in water? I personally do, yes. I do like to let them callus before anything. So if I personally cut the plant, I will let it callus and then proceed to do whatever it is I'm going to do, whether put it into water or into a substrate. Definitely, because yeah, I don't want to risk having any rot or anything like that. So I do that. And Sue says same effect as strip mining. Strip mining. No, my brain blanked. I'm not sure what that was. Was it in regards to the peat moss collection? And Deanna asks, what is the rule of thumb for picking the perfect pot? That's a great question. It really depends on the plant. So one, it's knowing the type of plant that you have. Is it something that will like to dry very, very, wants to get really nice and dry between waterings? Is it something that would prefer to remain a little bit moist in order to and not completely dry out? So if something like a lot of aroids, so something like a philodendron or a monstera, when it's nice and established, terracotta is great for most epiphytes. It's great. But for something like which is also in the aroid family, a peace lily does not want to really dry out all the way. And so something like a glazed pot or a ceramic pot, which tends to hold in a little bit more moisture, tends to be the better thing. Or even plastic. You can keep them in their nursery pots as well. When plants are still really young, so if you have a tiny, like a baby philodendron, a small monstera, they tend to need a little bit more moisture than their more mature counterparts. So I wouldn't recommend putting a small little plant into like an aroid into terracotta, because it'll just be, you can't keep up. It'll be drying out way too quickly, and you'll be having to constantly keep it in check and water it. And if you miss a watering, it's going to dehydrate. It's going to be more likely to dehydrate. For smaller plants that you want to put in terracotta, like some succulents, totally prefer it. I've found that chryssulas, a lot of chryssulas, they prefer to just stay in the nursery pot, in the plastic. They dry out way too quickly after being transferred into terracotta. So I think they like a little bit more moisture. So really depends on the plant. Like, do they want to really dry out, or do they want to really stay moist? And also in terms of a whole other aspect is, of course, does it have drainage holes? I think it's very important that they have drainage holes, and usually it's better if there's more than one hole. But I mean, a lot of folks swear by pots with no drainage hole. Like, I've had it for 20 years and that's great. And that usually means they've had the luck of knowing exactly how much water that plant needs. And it's like a practiced hand. They know. But if you're just starting out, for instance, I would not recommend a pot with no drainage holes, especially if you're not familiar with that plant specifically. And then in terms of size, so when you're going to put your plant into a new pot, don't go up crazy in size. You want to go up only about an inch or two in width and height from what it is currently. I have also seen a lot of people try to downgrade their plants. I recently saw someone who the pot was like a 6-inch pot, and he had grabbed this really pretty 4-inch pot, and he was trying to ask the salesperson, can I put this into this? And the salesperson kept trying to explain that even though the plant might look really delicate, it was like a little rubber tree, and they're like, even though it looks like it's not very wide, that root system is probably pretty developed, and so you don't want to take it and scrunch it into a smaller pot. That's not going to work. The same thing if you ever have a plant that is nice and lush and then it drops all its leaves, and you're taking care of it, you're rehabbing it for it to grow back. Just because the plant loses those top leaves, that root system is still there. So even though it looks like maybe this should be in a smaller container, you can't downgrade it. So definitely don't do that. But yeah, so there's so it's taking into size, not going up too high, the material that's being used, because it all depends on, does your plant basically does it like wet feet, which is the common saying. So if your plant likes wet feet, that means it's something that's very thirsty. It likes to stay somewhat moist or very moist. And it's not something that wants to dry through, completely. So terracotta, that's what terracotta is going to do, because terracotta it pulls water away from the substrate. And so, it's very porous. It's very, very porous. And so it's great for plants that, they don't want to sit in water. They really want that gas exchange. They need a lot of oxygen in their roots. But plants like peace lily, they very much like the moisture. So they would do great in like a glazed or ceramic pot, especially because that'll stay moist longer. You're welcome.
Great, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Oh, thank you, Sue, for clarifying. To strip off the soil to get the coal. Okay. And then Judy says, for air plants, do they need to be totally submerged in water? So it depends on the type of air plant. So if it's there is the air plants that are more like tropical, those you can completely dunk them. You can leave them submerged for even up to an hour and they're fine. But for the xeric species that are more for arid regions, like the xerographica, there's also, which is the other one? It's like the toradum. It's very spiky. So those types that are for arid regions, right? That are like high mountaintops, high light, high wind, high heat. They actually don't want to be completely submerged. So those are more of a dunk, or even just a quick rinse. They don't actually want to be completely submerged because they will actually start to rot. So really just, you have to identify where does your specific air plant fall under, in what category. And then Terry asks, can a chain of hearts be trimmed and propagated? Absolutely. I have a lot of chain of hearts. I actually have a chain of arrows. I had it back here and it was growing down, and it kept getting stabbed, the leaves, because I have a lot of succulents here, and I have like some opuntias with really big thick needles. So the chain, it was growing down, and then I was seeing the chains had the leaves had needles through them. So I was like, no. So I put it by the windowsill and it blew up. So I put it directly under a western window, and it's just off to the side. It's actually hidden behind a big opuntia that I have. And it just decided that it's really happy there. And so I had this little basket that I put because of course, I had to pull out all the fall decor. And so I have this little, I put it into a little, like it looks like an autumn leaf bowl. So I had put it in there. And then I had a bowl that was like pine cones and little like weave, like those little, I forget what they're called. They're like little balls of string. It's like a for decorative purposes. And it's been growing so fast that it completely went, and it's like it's starting to grow all over that, and putting out a bunch of growth. But yeah, they can totally, I could totally trim that. I could totally take a cutting and put it into water. They root very readily in water, and they will actually, when you put them in water, they will create a little bulbil. It's like a little, looks like a little ball, like a little potato. And so very similar to if you ever try to propagate ZZ plants, they do that too, where you'll do a cutting and then they create a little ball, the little rhizome basically, and then that is where the roots would come out. And you can totally plant those up, and yeah, and you can keep them going, but they readily propagate in water. If you wanted to try your hand at trimming chain of hearts. So I have a variegated chain of hearts. I have the string of needles, which is also a Ceropigia, but it's like the longer leaf. And then I have the arrows, and I love those. They're great. And then I'll take this one last thing, and then I will do a quick demo to show you how I like to transfer my plants over. So Linda asks, my rosemary plant is in a pot which thrived outside the summer. I now brought it inside, quarantined, good, very, very good, and have noticed that the leaves are not vibrant green, but are milky green. Though not as bad as powdery mildew, what should I do, and is it safe to use for cooking? Okay, good question. A couple things it could be. So one, it could just be rosemary does tend to be a perennial. So it does die back, usually in the fall, into the winter, it dies back. And once it's nice and woody, if you're in a region that will do so, if it's a very hard freeze, sometimes they will kind of grow more as an annual if it gets really cold by you. Otherwise, it tends to just die back and then it comes back. So one explanation could just be that. It could just be starting its process of dying back. And that's just why it's kind of looking a little sad for that reason. Another thing, so if it's more of a milky green, it could also be just the light difference as well. So rosemary, mint family in general, they very much like full sun, and so if it's being brought in and it's acclimating and also not having access to that really bright light, it could just be getting chlorotic. So it just means it's not, there's not enough light that like it was used to. And so it's starting to kind of show, it's showing kind of sickly kind of look. And then that third option, that it could be something's physically wrong with the plant. There's some type of pathogen that is messing with it. The rule of thumb for me personally, if it looks weird, I usually just wouldn't eat it. I've grown like cilantro and chives and things like that. And if the leaf looks odd, I just wouldn't consume it. Even if I knew I grew it here, I didn't put anything on it, or I personally just to be safe, I would just not consume it. But I mean, it could very well be the first two, which is just getting chlorotic. It's a big change from being outside to being inside. It's gonna show a change, or it could just be it's just cycling through and dying back, and that's completely normal. But on the off chance that there could be something potentially wrong, maybe there was some type of pathogen, and when you brought it in and during that acclimation process, that's very stressful for the plant. So their immune system actually can be compromised, like us when we're under really big amounts of stress. And what ends up happening is that the plant might already have been fighting some type of pathogen. And then when now that it's a little bit more vulnerable, the pathogen's like, yes. And then it really takes over. And this can happen with viruses in plants. Yeah, because they'll be in the plant already for years, and then it's not until the plant is just a little bit more vulnerable that the virus will very much take hold on the plant. So you never know. So yeah, it's hard to tell in that case, because there could be several scenarios and some that are much more benign. And so yeah, so it's hard to tell. I would say if it's looking a little bit off or just weird, maybe just refrain from consuming it, just to be safe. Not that a lot of like viruses that, let's say, in the plant can't necessarily harm humans, but still, just to be safe. You never know. Yeah. And yeah, and Cynthia says, I have a 45-year-old Aphidestra. I think that's the cast iron plant, if I'm not mistaken, that lived outside year-round in a metal pail in Pasadena, inland Southern California area. It was either dry as a bone or completely drowned after our infrequent rain. And in both instances, I was not a good mama. Now that we are near Denver, it has to live indoors. It got drowned while we were on vacation and is staying very wet. What should I do? I'd hate to lose it because it's the only plant I've ever had that survived my inattention. Cast iron plants have gotten that name for their resilience. So they're one of those plants that you can kick them when they're down and they'll still be like, here's a new leaf. Hopefully it should be fine. They can really put up with those spectrums, right, of really heavy waterings to infrequent drought periods. If you're very concerned about how moist though, and it's like really saturated, like someone took a hose to it or something, you could try to see if there's any excess water by turning the pot to see if there's any excess water that might actually come out, because the soil can only take up so much moisture. And if it can't, the water will literally sit there. So you can try that to see if there's any of that extra water there. Another potential thing would be to have a fan. So to turn on a fan and to have it kind of pointing downwards so that there's a little bit more air and air circulation to help dry it out. You can try also putting it outside on a really sunny day. If you have any sunny days coming up, that might be the best thing. It'll really dry that out for you. But yeah, if it's currently really rainy or very cold out and you're like, okay, I can't really put it outside, then a fan might be the best thing. I wouldn't recommend something like a heat lamp because it could burn the plant, but a fan could help if it's really wet, and also making sure that there's no extra water inside of there. So I hope that helps. So let me quickly show you. So this is how I like to do my transfers. So there are two ways that I like to do this. One is if I have a plant, let's say I'll use this Syngonium as an example. And so where it's starting to get some of these roots, but it's not like crazy developed yet, right? So one option is I would put this into sphagnum or leca. So I might do that. So sometimes what I'll do is that I will put, let's say I put this into sphagnum, get it to produce a couple more roots for me. Then I'd switch it out into leca, and then with leca will dry. I let it completely dry out, and when I actually notice that it's dry, I usually wait like an extra day, and then I give it water, so that it starts to kind of mimic what the substrate would do. Gets really dry, really wet, really dry, really wet. And I like to do that so that it starts really putting out stronger roots. It starts to harden off the roots a little bit. And then I will put it into a mix. So that's one way that I was doing it for a while. This is the way I've been doing it lately, and I've been having a lot of success with it. So that's how I was doing it, where I would be like sphagnum, leca, and then mix. Now I actually do a lasagna. And so what I like to do is I'll grab, so here we go. Let me grab a container here. So I like to use these, and so I've drilled a little drainage. I've poked little drainage holes in here. And so what I like to do is that I will add one layer of substrate, and then one layer of either perlite or leca, or a mix of both, some type of kind of rocky substrate there. And then I will top it off with a little bit of sphagnum moss. And so especially if I have nodes that are closer to the top to stimulate growth. And so what I'll do is that I'll take the node and put it into that layer that it's like right on the cusp of the layer between the sphagnum and the perlite or the leca, whichever I'm using. And then what happens is that, and then I just leave a little bit of, if the roots are long enough, of that going into the actual substrate that's on the bottom. And so what happens is that as the roots are developing, they push through into that substrate and get really nice. But in the meantime, they're not getting super saturated if they're not in that soil, right, before they might be ready to. So I've been doing it like this, and I've actually found that a lot of like my Hoyas, my aeroids, they've been rooting really well that way. And so I basically kind of nestle it in the middle, and as they produce more roots, it gets pushed into the actual substrate that I want it to be in. And I've just found it's kind of like a hybrid option, especially if I've already been growing them in leca or perlite. It's like a really nice transitional period. So it's kind of like the mix that I want them to be in is at the bottom. And so then they'll just push through. So I'll quickly, where did I set that down? Of course, I set down my my mix over here. Hold on one second. Hi. Mozart just, oh no, don't go on my seat now. So here's an example of a mix. I was using a bamboo stick to mix it up here. This is an example of my aeroid mix. So what I have in here is perlite. I have orchid bark. There's cocoa coir. There is lava rock. There's also leca in here. I throw leca in everything. And then there's a little bit of succulent soil mix, just a little bit. But it's a very chunky mix. So I want a lot of air going through my mix. I don't want it to be completely brown, right? I don't want it to be holding in loads of moisture. That's what I would like to avoid. I want it to be breathable, for the plants not to kind of get stuck in mud, and yeah, to really be able to have oxygen pockets basically throughout the entire thing. So I will just fill up this bottom part with some of this mix. And again, cocoa coir, orchid bark, lava rock, perlite, leca, a little bit of succulent soil. Oh, I also add a little bit of worm castings and a pinch of horticultural charcoal. So I like to add that. So the horticultural, so the worm castings is to feed the plant. That is just highly nutritious for the plant itself. And then the horticultural charcoal also is nutritious to the plant, but it's more so for the beneficial microorganisms that are in your mix. So just remember that your soil, your potting mix is an ecosystem. There are critters in here, and a lot of folks you see something crawling and people panic immediately, right? They think it has to be bad because it's crawling in here. But that's not always the case. There's a lot of beneficial things, with like little isopods or springtails, that they're good for your mix. Some mushrooms, like some mycorrhizal fungi, which are very good for your plant. They're not trying to harm your plant at all. They actually coexist. It's a partnership, a symbiotic relationship with the plant. And then folks, will panic when they see these types of things. So just recognize that there is a beneficial, whole little ecosystem in your mix, and you can purposely add beneficial organisms to your mix. As I said, I have my own colonies that I like to seed my pots with. But also there are things like BioShot. There are different companies now that it's becoming much more popularized, that you can buy a little packet with archaea, bacteria, mycorrhizal fungi that you can literally, they just come in little packets and you can add them to your plant. This is why it's very important that if you ever did have a pest issue on your plant, when you have a very healthy soil mix, it is it's going to help with your plant's immune system. But also if you end up treating it, know that you would potentially kill a lot of the other types of microorganisms in your soil, especially if you do a hydrogen peroxide like drench. That will usually kill everything. So whether good or bad, it's indiscriminate. So it will kill everything that is in your pot, unfortunately. So just be aware of that. So you're kind of starting over if you do that, if you do a hydrogen peroxide drench. And somebody just asked, I saw it pop up, how do you know like a good mushroom from a bad mushroom? So usually if you actually see a mushroom, like an actual mushroom growing, that tends to just mean that you are that it's actually just, your soil is really good. There's a lot of organic material in there, and usually mushrooms aren't bad. For the ones that occur in our plants, they're not, I think like 99.9% of the time, it's perfectly fine. Now mold is a different thing. So if you see mold, there are some types of mycorrhizal fungi that create mushrooms, because that's the fruiting body, that's their sexual reproductive organ, that look like mold when it's primordia. So it's like the little yellow mushrooms, the leuco, the name is escaping me. But it kind of looks like mold, but then that's when they start popping up as little mushrooms. The ones you have to worry about are things that are gray mold. Be very mindful of that. And white mold, there are some white molds that are okay, and then there's some that are not. And the ones that are not is if you see that they are actively attacking your plant. So if you see the mold growing up on the stem, at the base of your plant, on the leaves, right? It's like all of a sudden your plant is getting furry. That's bad. So that's a very bad one. So yeah, but yeah. So sometimes if a mushroom is growing in your plant, you don't have to worry about it. It's really not hurting your plant at all. You can just pluck them. People pluck them out. Now, mind you, that's just the fruiting body. So that doesn't mean that the fungi is gone. They're beneath the soil. So if you're really, really skeeved out about it or something, you could remove a couple layers of soil and replace it. You could let it dry out, and then usually that kind of helps bring down the amount because of fungal activity. If it's super dry, because it's not an adequate environment for them. It wouldn't kill the whole thing, but if it was really bothering you, but yeah, and but you don't have to worry about that. And then Deanna's asking, when you transplant that plant, do you remove all the old substrate? So these were kept in water, so they were not in any substrate. But let's say you were transplanting a different plant that was in substrate, and you're putting it into a new pot with new mix. So it really depends. If there was something wrong with the plant, like it had a pest or something, then I would definitely recommend very carefully rinsing out all the substrate, making sure it's as clean as possible. So it's nice and kind of sterile when you put it into the new mix. If there was nothing wrong with the plant and it just outgrew the pot, or maybe it was like in a really bad mix, and you saw it was holding on to too much water, and you're like, okay, I need to switch this out into an aeroid mix just for my own sanity, because if I lose this, I don't really want to lose this. Then you don't necessarily have to make sure it's like super, super clean. But you could just try to get as much off. Like, let's say if it's something that's really peat heavy, that tends to, when it dries out, it becomes like a brick. So I would recommend actually wetting that, like watering it a little bit so that it's a little looser and easier for you to remove. Because if you're trying when it's dry and it's like a peat mix, you'll be ripping off your roots because it's like cement. it's really, really bad.
Okay, thanks, Jocelyn.
You're welcome. And so this is just to show you, it's super easy. So again, like a little lasagna. So here's my aeroid mix. You see how much perlite, there's a lot of air pockets there. There is chunks of orchid bark, right? So it's not like a brown mix. I don't use a brown mix. So then what I do is I take a little bit of this little mix with leca and perlite. I just put a little bit on there, just a first little layer, and then I'm gonna put this guy on here. So I nestle those roots right up here. So you see how it's right on top of that little light layer of perlite. And then I put a little bit more. So because this guy doesn't have another node, it just has that one little node. I'm not going to put sphagnum on this one. If it had multiple nodes on top, I would put some sphagnum on there to try to get that growth. Because then that might be another spot for me to cut. So then I'll have two of those plants. I always try to to make more plants, and if I can, then I do. But then here, see, so now it's a mix. The rest was like perlite and leca, and I threw, as I was pouring it in, I threw a couple pieces of orchid bark in there, again, just for a little bit more chunk. But it's like a lasagna, right? And so now as I water the plant and I saturate it, those roots are going to work their way down into the substrate. But that node, that chunk, is not sitting right on top of my substrate mix. And I've just found that lessens. This is just from what I've seen, where I've taken the chunks and put them directly into the substrate. I've found that sometimes they start to exhibit that rot. But if I do a thin layer of the perlite and then add that little layer of perlite around the actual node itself and that chunk itself, and I leave all that extra substrate more at the bottom, it starts to push its way through, and I get really hardier roots, and I have less rot on any of the parts of the plant. And it's not that I'm overwatering them or anything like that. Like I've just found that personally it's helped a lot. And so this is how I've liked to do it. It's like this little lasagna thing. In terms of of the benefits of sphagnum. Yes. So if, for instance, with this plant here, this was a cutting that I just got, and it's some type of Scindapsus. And so with this one, for instance, right? Look at all the nodes. There are so many nodes here. You could see there's a little aerial root growing. There's all these nodes. And then here, it's like dried. This was completely dried, and this part is dead tissue. This is a living node here. Now, if I wanted to, what I could do is, chop here, chop like here and here, and start these in sphagnum. So I could totally do that. Or if I were to cut this off, put this in water, and then this roots, what I could do is put this in sphagnum, and then that would start to stimulate the roots. So sphagnum, it's more so if I add it to like the top of the plant, it's more so if there's extra nodes that I want to activate. So if it adds a little bit, it's just a little bit more moisture. And so it ends up really activating these nodes a little bit more. So then they'll start growing, and it will give me a chance if I want to propagate them. And also sometimes they'll stimulate just aerial root growth, which is great if I want to stake the plant, if I want to put it up on a pole. So that's why I like to sometimes add the sphagnum. If I have them in completely just in water, and then I put them into sphagnum, so sometimes I opt to do that as well. And that's more so to just stimulate the growth of soil roots, right? You want roots that they're thicker, they have root hairs, they're just stronger roots as opposed to the really flimsy water roots. And so I've tried upgrading plants from water to sphagnum, and I've tried upgrading from water to leca. And so sometimes as I mentioned, what I'll do sometimes is actually have like some in sphagnum, then transfer them into something like leca, and then put them into into an actual substrate or some type of lasagna type of thing, like I did with this guy. Oh yes, Cynthia, leca is LECA, and so it's an acronym, and so it stands for lightweight expanded clay aggregate. So leca. But yeah, it's sometimes pronounced leca. But yeah, it's lightweight expanded clay aggregate. And it's literally just clay balls. They're just little balls of clay. And they come in different sizes. Yeah, and then Linda, have you considered offering to sell cuttings to our class members? I have. I just haven't had that many. So sometimes like I'll just have like an extra one, and then I'm like, oh, but it's not enough to like share. And so I was telling my husband that I want to do that. Maybe I have a couple of plants that have really long runners, so I'll try my hand and see if I can get a couple of of propagations out. But yeah. And Brenda, love your lasagna look using the cup so you can see. Yes. So this was actually very recent. Like in the last year, I started switching a lot to using clear containers. So I have clear netted containers that have like the slits, like the orchid containers. I have like flimsier like pot inserts that you put your soil in there, and then you put that into a display pot. But it's like really soft. It's like a flimsy plastic. I've been using that a lot for my big aeroids. And then for my cuttings, like all my little propagations, I've been just using plastic cups, because then I can reuse them. So I just do that. I just got a soldering iron, and I just make the holes at the base, and there you go. And I'm like, oh, that was easy. So I don't have to go and buy really expensive glass or anything like that. And so yeah, with these guys, and I just like being able to see through. so that again, there's a color change when your plants dry. And so it's just much easier. And then I can actually see, is there something odd happening? I can see if there's root growth because they'll start kind of wrapping around. And so I like being able to see. So I have both Brian and we've been switching a lot to transparent pots for that reason. Yeah. Judy, how many plants do you have now? We lost a few to these thrips. We've lost maybe like 6 or 7 plants. So it's not a big hit, but a lot of our plants right now are naked. So they've been getting treated. So they lost their leaves. So they're sticks, but they're still here. They're just sticks right now. Gosh, we still have over 300. So we still have over 300. I actually saw yesterday someone on Facebook posted about that they have 700 plants. And it was like indoors. It wasn't like an outdoor garden, because that's what I thought. I was like, oh, maybe she's talking about outdoors. And so she has a greenhouse, and then she has hundreds in her house. And I was like looking at Brian, and I was like, we're struggling to stay on top of 300 on making sure everybody gets attention. I don't think I can do 700. I probably need like a full-time staff for that. Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot. All right. But oh, and Holly says if you ever have too many of those friendly critters, you can pass them along. Yes. So I do want to grow out my my colonies a little bit more. So I'm actually, a friend of mine, she was really into my isopod colony, and I started that colony with only like 5 or 6, and now there has to be like 100 in there. So I'm going to be creating new colonies. So I'm going to be setting up small terrariums and then putting like 10 in each one and letting them propagate. So if I can start to get like a bunch of colonies going, then I might actually consider selling them and oh, what is a colony? Yes. So it's basically, you have a little setup and you purposely grow a type of invertebrate, or so for instance, I have springtails, and so they are in just a regular plastic Tupperware container, and they're in pieces of horticultural charcoal, these big chunks of charcoal, and I just add a little bit of spring water, and they like to eat wheat germ, and they also like to eat fish flakes. And it's literally, when you open it, they're just jumping, and it looks like little fleas. And so and they're all over the charcoal, these little white invertebrates. And so they're not insects. They look like insects, but they're not. And yeah, and then I put them into my terrariums and stuff to help my plants out. And the same with the isopods. I have dwarf white isopods, which folks know them, and they're also known as roly-polies, but these are dwarves, so they're super tiny, and they're white. And then I grow those out in a little colony that I set up on my bookshelf, and it's just a little thing. I had put some substrate, some leca. I actually put leca in there, some activated charcoal, some sphagnum, and some pieces of ethically sourced leaves that are not sprayed. So like there's like oak leaves and maple leaves, and also some lichens in there. And so you basically build like a little ecosystem, and also with pieces of wood that break down. And then the isopods, that's what they do, is that they're decomposers, right? They're eating anything that's breaking down and decaying, and so they're enjoying it in there. Yes, like mini sow bugs, exactly. Like soup, there's tiny. And yeah, and I started with like 5 or 6, and they just keep having babies. And so I have a whole little terrarium that's just full of them. So I'm gonna start out new ones to have them spread out, because yeah, there's there's a lot right now in that little thing. But yeah. And the last question I'll take is Tish, I have 3 peace lily plants and they all continue to get brown edges. Help. I do not understand why this keeps happening. I give them filtered light, their soil is kept moist, and they're in plastic pots. My I would say more than likely try to check if you don't have a humidity gauge. I would recommend getting one. So you can get really cheap ones that will tell you the temperature and the humidity in your area. And so I would definitely recommend if the plants are in completely different places, get one for each place. Again, they're super cheap. You can get like 3 for $7. Now they were really expensive before and now they're super cheap. So, but try to see if there is something going on with your humidity levels. If you've been turning on an AC, if there has been a window open, if there have been drastic changes of temperature recently, if they are located next to a door. Sometimes that can happen, like a screen door or your front door. And it's just where that humidity is constantly changing. It can't stay nice and or it's just fluctuating too quickly, because humidity will change from day to night. But if the change is happening too quickly, there's too many drafts or something like that, then that would potentially cause them to start drying out that way. In regards to, Sue is asking, but would it help to mist them? Yes and no. So misting will only help the atmospheric humidity for a couple minutes, but it's not a sustained amount of humidity. So it wouldn't work long term. Maybe getting a humidifier if you really notice that, oh my gosh, my humidity is really low. That could be what's happening. Especially if it's 3 separate plants. I'm going to assume that it could very much be your humidity. Hold on one second. My I feel like I got something caught in my throat. Okay. Woo! And then someone said, give them a timeout in a bathroom after a shower. Yeah, so that can help, but with peace lilies specifically, they hate moving. So peace lilies hate to be moved. So if you actually move them, even for a short period of time, they can get really, really stressed and actually show that and start to, get more crispy leaves or get leaves that turn yellow. They just really don't like being moved. There was this one client of mine that moved a plant. She was going on vacation, and so she moved it from the room it was currently in, because when she was physically there, she could make sure it was a very sunny room, so she could like constantly check on the plant. But because she was going to go away, she was like, oh, I'm just going to put it in in my bedroom instead of my living room, and because it's a little bit more shaded and it'll be more protected, and she thought she was helping, and she was only gone for like a 3-day weekend. And the poor plant went into shock, and when she got back, it was just like completely, and she's like, I wasn't even away long enough like for it, and it was still wet. It was, but yeah, they really don't like to be moved. Yeah. Yeah, thanks so much, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in, and I hope this was fun and that you found it informative. Thanks so much, and enjoy the rest of your Monday, everyone, and the rest of your week. And I guess when I see you, is next week already going to be? Were we already going to be in October next? Yeah. I can't believe it. It's yeah. It's nuts. It's coming fast. I have a big presentation at the end of October, at the American Herbalist Guild Symposium, and I'm like watching the calendar days, and I'm like, oh, I'm just
That's gonna be fun for you.
yeah. It's gonna be loads of fun, but I'm definitely incredibly nervous. It's gonna be my first time like on a podium, you know. So like in front of a huge crowd. So let's see how that goes. I think I'm just gonna pretend like no one's there. But thank you. So yes, yes, you says just pretend you are here. Exactly.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly. I'll be like, I'm gonna have my headphones on. I need to get this headspace going. No, absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone. And please, and yes, Anne says pretend they're all in their PJs. Absolutely. Thanks so much, everyone. And please stay safe. And yeah, I'll see you next week. Have a good one.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.